JSHeroes Meetups. I saw her live in one of the conferences, and I was really amazed by her talk. And I'm really happy that she's here to share with us her wisdom about testing in production.
Thank you. I'm
You're
happy
welcome.
to be here. Okay, so I want to start off by telling you guys a story about something that happened to me a few years ago. I was interviewing at this test engineering position for this company, and I was really, really nervous. And I walked into this interview and I'm answering all the questions correctly, and everything's going really great. And then at the end of the interviewer asked me if I had like any questions for him. So I asked him about their staging environment and how their releases work, and how does it work with the different testing environments. And he stopped me and he said they don't have a staging environment, they test in production. And I was so shocked. I thought this was like a trick in the interview. Like, what do you mean you test in production? He could see that I was really confused. So he asked me to do something that I want all of you to do right now. So I want everyone to think about the last feature that your team deployed. Okay, so you're thinking about this feature, you have it in your head. I can't see any of you because none of you turned on your cameras, but I'm assuming you're all thinking about this. Okay. Is it working? Is this feature working right now in production? How do you know? Your users haven't reported anything to you, your alarms haven't gone off, so you assume that it's working, right? But you don't know. Testing in production is the only way to know that your features are working in production right now. So testing in production means testing your features in the environment that your features will live in, not using a dummy environment like staging or QA or something like that. And what is it not? It's not a replacement for all testing, and it's not the end of the world. So I'm Talia. I'm a dev advocate at Split, and this is my Twitter. You guys can follow me if you want. My passions include Chipotle. I actually don't know if you guys have Chipotle in Romania, but it's like a fast food, like Mexican food type place, and it's amazing. So my passions include Chipotle and breaking my features prior to launch, and of course testing my coworkers. It's what every good test engineer does. But what do I mean by testing my coworkers? I test their reactions to things that I think are pretty funny. I'm also a Warriors fan, so this one was particularly fun. Okay, so after the interview, I went home and I did my homework. So why have I never heard about testing in production? And if it's so great, why aren't more companies using it? Most companies and all the companies that I had worked for previously use a test environment or a staging environment. And I would ask for a show of hands, but I'm assuming that most of you guys use a test environment or a staging environment, and I don't even have to ask you. Like, I already know that that environment is not an exact replica of production. So testing environments really are not the way to go here, and let's talk about why. So through my experience and my research, this is what I've learned. Staging environments are expensive to maintain. So if you just take into account like a basic website architecture of web servers in front of a number of application servers that query a database and then throw in like a memory-based cache, you're looking at over $100,000 per year, and that's not taking into account the cost of software licenses, support, infrastructure costs. So each staging environment per year is going to run you about $100,000. And I was talking to this company the other day, and they said that they had 8 staging environments before they released their code to production. Like, they're spending almost $1 million a year on staging environments. It was crazy. So staging test results do not always match production test results, which I'm sure as developers, like we experience this all the time. So imagine like you're testing a feature in staging and you worked so hard on it and you went through all the requirements, you went through all the documentation with your product owner, and you fixed all the bugs, and then your end-to-end tests are passing in staging, and you sign off on the feature, and then you launch it to production, and what happens? There's a bug. So these environments are different, plain and simple. Production includes data that staging doesn't have. And so you're never going to know the differences between staging and production until you test in production. Okay, so picture this. You are testing a high priority fix for a feature and you log into staging to test it, but staging is down. You get the 404 screen of death. So you ping the DevOps guy, but he's not answering. So you ping someone else and they tell you to open an IT ticket. And then you have to get your manager to escalate it. And meanwhile, you're testing this high priority ticket and no one seems to care. So no one's going to get a call in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner if staging is broken. Really, no one cares. Okay, so the load in staging does not match production. So when you think of the number of people who use your staging environment versus your production environment, the difference is a lot. And because the load is different, the accuracy of speed and lag times is not going to be correct. And at the end of the day, I've never heard anyone speak highly of their staging environment. Okay, but I know what you're thinking. I know that testing in production is like this huge risky thing that, what could go wrong? But what's the first thing you do right after you deploy a feature to production? You go to production and you test it, right? Okay, so some more things I learned when I was studying about this is that testing in production works when the whole team owns product quality. So contrary to popular belief, it's not just the test engineer's job or the QA engineer's job or the product person's job or just the developer's job to ensure product quality. This is a team effort, and especially when you're doing something sensitive like testing in production, it's really just a team effort. Testing in production only works when you test early and often, because the earlier you start testing, the earlier you'll find bugs and defects, which means the earlier you'll be delivering value to your users. And testing in production only works when you trust your team and your product. So think about this. Companies don't, oh, there's a siren. I'm just gonna pause for 1 second. It's kind of crazy in LA right now. I don't know if you guys know. Okay, I think it's gone. Okay, so companies don't test in production because of this fear and this lack of trust in their systems. And for the same reason, they refuse to engage in the tools and process changes that are going to generate that trust. So I know that it's risky. I know that testing in production can affect real end users. It can affect reporting and business decisions. It can affect third parties that your software is integrated with. I know that it's super risky, but I'm going to show you a step-by-step process, and we're going to address all of these risks together. So the first step when you're testing in production is to install the necessary tools. And the first tool that you need, that's really the key, is feature flagging. And feature flagging is a way to decide who sees which features. It's used to hide, enable, or disable features at runtime. And it's basically in your code an if-else statement, which I'll show you in a little bit. So here's what it looks like in my head. So our developers would create a feature flag from the UI, which again, I'll show you in a minute. And then they target all of our internal teammates. So dev, QA, product, design, all of our automation bots. So anything related to the feature can only be seen by the users inside of the feature flag, because the default is off right now. So the people on the right, these end users are real users. They don't see anything related to the feature. So if there's a new bug, if there's a bug in your new feature, it has no impact on your end users because they don't have access to it. They don't have the right permissions to see anything related to the feature, and that includes bugs. So while the feature flag is off, you go in and you test everything. So you're testing to make sure that all the proper functionality works, you're fixing all the bugs, you're making sure that this feature works in production. So once you know that your feature is working, you turn on the flag already knowing 100% that your features are working in production and you didn't break anything that was existing. And now when you turn the feature flag on, everyone sees the new feature and now your users are happy and they're dancing because they have a perfect feature and they don't have bugs to report. So yeah. And then basically you repeat this process with every new feature. So each feature has its own feature flag. So it can be overwhelming when you have a lot of flags and you don't know which combinations to test. So the best thing to do is to talk to your product owner to prioritize what these flows are. And then together with your data analyst, you can choose what the most important flows are that need to be automated. So basically, you get the most important business flows from your product owner, and then you get the flows that your users are doing the most in production, and from there you get that list. And then again, target your automation bots inside the feature flags, which I'll also show you. So after you feel comfortable and you know that the release went out successfully, it's a good idea to delete the feature flag. And then after you delete the flag in the UI, you should delete it in the code also, just because you don't want stale code. And then I also have a video that goes much more in depth on feature flag maintenance that you can look up that goes really just a lot more into detail. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through how to do what I just showed you in the UI. So this is from the split UI. So there's a button that says create split. And that just means like you're creating a feature flag. So in this context, a split is a feature flag. So the first thing you want to do is name your flag. And this is the same name that you'll include in your code. So the next thing after you decide a name is to define a traffic type. And the traffic type differentiates the people who see your feature and the people who don't see your feature. So this can be device if you only want people with Android devices to see this feature, or if you only want iOS devices to see this feature. If you can also differentiate by employee or location, if you only want people in Romania to see this feature, or whatever it is, you can decide. I'm going to do this by user because that's what makes testing in production possible for me. So after you create the flag, you're going to set up your targeting rules. And again, this means who can see your feature. So in my targeting rules, I'm saying that me and my developers and my product person and my designers and my automation robot can see the feature. And then the default rule, so everyone who's not in this list cannot see that feature. So they cannot see anything related to the feature. This includes bugs, this includes data that the feature is linked with. And again, notice that we do have this test user inside the feature flag, and that's there for automation so that I can run automation scripts while the feature flag is off. So my feature flag looks like this in my code. It's going to say, if the user is in this flag, give them treatment on, and if they're not, give them the existing treatment. So then in my automation script, it looks something like this. I'm going to log in as that test user that was in the feature flag, and I'm going to perform the test, do whatever I need to do, and then expect that feature to work. And I'm going to expect it to work because I have the right permissions as that test user to see what is linked to that feature. And that's it. So the cherry on top of the cake is that when you turn on the feature in production, you already know that the feature is working. So there's no surprises. Okay, so the next tool that you need is an automation framework. And you need an automation framework because it's not scalable to test everything manually. especially when you're testing in production. And again, it's a really sensitive thing. So you want an automation framework that's easy to adopt. So if it takes months of implementation and if it takes so long to set up and your developers are just fed up, like that's not the right tool for you. You want one that's easy to debug. So when something goes wrong, do you know what's going on, or does it take you hours to figure out what the problem is? You also want an automation framework that has good reporting. So when a test passes, do you know exactly what the functionality is that passed? Do you know how the test could be improved? The reporting is super important. And then you also want to get an automation framework that has a good support community. So I can't tell you how many automation frameworks that I've used that don't have a good support community, and I will have issues and I will open a ticket in GitHub or Stack Overflow or whatever, and like no one responds and no one knows the answer to my problems, and it gets really frustrating. So just make sure that there is a support community, because if something goes wrong and you need help, it's really important that you are able to get that. Okay, so the next thing you need is a job scheduler that will run your tests for you. So this can be a simple cron job or through something like Jenkins. Sorry, 1 second.
Don't worry, as long as you're safe.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so this can be like a simple cron job or through something like Jenkins. I'll list out all the ones that I've used in a second. And then a question that I get a lot of the time is, why not just run the tests in a loop? Like, testing in production is really sensitive, and if you're going to do it, you should just do it continuously. So first of all, it's overkill. You can set up the test to run in the build pipeline or incrementally, like I said. To run them in a loop is just overkill. And then you also just want to trust your tests. So something that I like to do is run the tests 20, 30 times in production and watch them pass. And that builds my confidence, so that when I push them up and they're running, I know what exactly the test is doing because I've seen them run. Okay, so the next thing that you need, the next tool, is an alerting tool. And it's really important that you choose an alerting tool that can be integrated with your job scheduler. So everyone is on call here, and everyone on your team, from product to design to engineering, should be on call, because everyone on the team owns product quality. Okay, so these are the tools that I've used for testing in production, and I'll just go through each of them really fast. So for feature flagging, I've used Split and Launch Darkly. For my automation framework, I love Robot Framework. That's like my ultimate favorite automation framework of all time. And then Puppeteer and Jest. Puppeteer is not the easiest to use and set up, but I actually prefer Cypress for JavaScript for an automation framework, but I haven't used Cypress with testing in production, so I'm not sure. I wasn't going to recommend that because I haven't used it. But if you're just looking for an automation framework, I would choose Cypress over Puppeteer. And then for Angular applications, I've used Protractor. And then for my job scheduler, like Jenkins, Circle CI, Travis, like they're all the same. And then for my alerting, I have set up PagerDuty and Slack. So something that I like to do is to set up my really critical alerts, like the things that you're going to wake up in the middle of the night for. I set those up with PagerDuty. And then the things that are lower level alerts, like, you know, all the tests have passed, or, you know, there's this smaller issue, then I set those up with Slack. So you can differentiate between the alerting types. Okay, so the next step after you install all of your tools is to create your test data. So the problem is you need a way to create and manipulate test data in production without affecting real end users or any data or analytics. So a solution is to create a consistent naming convention for test users. And these users act like real people and they look like real people, but only we would be able to interact with them. Like the outside world are not going to be able to see them or interact with them, because what we do is we create this Boolean. And something like is test user is true, or is test equals true, or whatever you decide, so that in your data dashboard, whether you're using like Datadog or Looker or whatever dashboard you have, you can exclude all the actions done by users whose is test user Boolean is set to true. Or you can differentiate them into like two separate tables. So like all of your test data goes into one table, and then all of your normal user data goes into another table. And then you can have a back-end flagging system that's used to identify all of your test entities. So if the flag was on, then you know that this page or this specific object or this thing that's in production is a test entity, and it should not be included in any data and analytics. So in your automation scripts, you make sure that your test entities only interact with each other. So that means that your test user logs in to your application, and then they click on the test object that does this thing. Like, your test entities should only interact with each other. And you can hard code that in your test, and you can say like login as this test user and click on this test thing and do whatever you need the test to do. So, and then if any part of that fails, or if your test doesn't find that test object, then the test needs to fail and you need to figure out what's going on. So once you have these specific predetermined guidelines, you can create and manipulate these testing entities in production, and this is how you do it safely. But each team has their own flows, has their own like user flows. So you need to sit down with your team and figure out like what these specific guidelines are, because each product is obviously different. Okay, so the next step is to write your tests. So personally, I like BDD because it's easy to read and it's easy to write. My like ideal setup is robot framework with Cucumber and Gherkin and just simple BDD. It makes it also really easy for my product owner when he looks at my tests and he knows exactly what's going on, because it uses a keyword-driven library. Yeah, I really love robot framework, guys. Okay, so the next step is to have a really good setup and teardown. So basically in your setup for your test, you want to clear your cookies, do your login, basically just set up the test, whatever you need to do. And then in your test, you can perform whatever actions you need, validate whatever functionality. And then in your teardown, you can undo any actions of the test. This is basically like your cleanup time. So something that's really important to keep in mind is that if any step fails, whether it's your setup, your test, or your teardown, you need to immediately get alerted, and then the test needs to stop. So if your cleanup fails and like you still have test data in production, like that's a problem. You need to go back and fix it, figure out what's going on. Like if any step of this fails, it's a problem. Sorry, guys. Okay, so the next step is to deploy to a production canary. And this, a lot of companies, a lot of teams that I've worked with think that this is optional, and it can be optional, but I'm gonna go through it and you'll understand the value of why you should do it. Okay, so production canaries allow you to slowly roll out a change to a small subset of users before you roll it out to the entire population. And basically, like the story of a production canary is like back in the days of like coal mining, like the miners would like send a canary bird down with them, and like if the canary had trouble breathing, then the canary would die. And so like that's how they would know like, oh, there's something in the air that's bad and like we need to get out now. So basically what this does is it just like minimizes the impact if something goes wrong. It like gives you that alert that, you've implemented something that's wrong for, 1% of the population, and you can fix it. So basically what this does is it provides risk mitigation. So Do you want 100% of your users to encounter this issue or 1%? What this means is like, if you went through the feature flagging process and if there was a bug that you did release to production, this is like an extra layer of protection that says, I'm only going to show this feature to 1% of your population, make sure that it works for them, and then I'll release it to everyone. So this just allows you to identify the issue and then roll it back to a good version and fix it in a controlled environment. And then just a note that like infrastructure and configuration changes, in my opinion, should always be released with a Canary, just because these are usually really sensitive changes that affect a lot of people, and you want to make sure that they work for a smaller population before you roll it out to everyone. And this is what the Canary setup looks like. It's split. It's just super intuitive. There's just a lever that you can say, I want to allocate 5% traffic or 10% traffic or whatever. And then as you build your confidence, you can slowly increase this. So what if there's an issue with your Canary code? Like what if you do this process and you do have an issue? Basically just first stay calm, like ask yourself if it's okay if your users see this. And if yes, keep the Canary as is and fix the bug. And if not, then just return the Canary to 0% traffic, fix the bug, and then redeploy. So in terms of risk mitigation, before launch, use feature flags to target your users. And then after launch, use production canaries to limit your audience. Okay, so the outcome of this process was just incredible. So we as a team just had higher confidence. We had an increased developer velocity because our developers were spending more time creating value to our users and creating features and less time fixing bugs. And at the end of the day, like testing in production promotes a proactive engineering culture. So I don't want to wait until something breaks, have a user report it to me, and then fix it. Like I want to know what's going on and fix any issues before my users ever see anything wrong. And what this did long term, again, is that it minimized our user interaction with bugs and defects, and it really ensured a great user experience. Okay, so just a note on performance testing in production, like yes, it's possible. You want to do it at a time with low traffic and be prepared for outages. So I was working at a company that we did performance testing in production, and basically it sucked, but everyone had to wake up at like 1 a.m., do the test, and then you could go back to sleep. And like we all got paid overtime, like it wasn't a big deal, but you want to do this at a time with low traffic, and it's better to do this on purpose and control the outcome because you need to be prepared. Okay, and then how to handle third parties. So when you're handling third parties, what's worked best for me is to have a header in the API request that you send to the third party, and then work with the third party and tell them, hey, any request that you get with this header is coming from a test, so I want you to handle it differently, and tell them what you want. So I've done this a few times with third parties where I say, hey, if you see this header that says like is test user or whatever it is, like I want you to do this other thing with it and don't treat it like a production request. Okay, so what if you cannot test in prod? Like what if you absolutely cannot test in prod? You work for, I don't know, some institution that is just, it's not possible. You can't do it. This is what I recommend. I recommend using a containerized environment and spinning that up per build. So you can use Docker to spin up your microservices, but just remember, the more dependencies you have, the more complicated it is, because you need to know which versions of Docker are going to be used in production and then test against those versions. Sorry, guys. You also need to run separate tests for each individual microservice as well as all of them together. It's also just not the most secure place, especially when you're talking about like pen testing and like the OWASP tests. Hackers are constantly targeting those systems. And again, it's super expensive. If you think of like the number of times that you're going to have to spin up these environments for these tests to run, it just adds up. So testing in a containerized environment is good. It's just not as good, in my opinion. So what about other non-production tests? So basically, staging environments can still be used for pre-production testing if you have things like SOX compliance or things that are like privacy related, things that need to minimize data breaches. So things like this can be tested in a staging environment. The place where production tests operate is in this like smaller bubble. So if you think of all of your tests, within that basic suite of tests, you have your unit tests and your snapshot tests. And then within that, you have your end-to-end flows. And then within the end-to-end flows, you have your production tests. So just notice that there are production tests, or sorry, there are end-to-end flows that are not production tests, and that's due to these, you know, data issues or SOX compliant issues or whatever it is. So your product and your company is going to be a little bit different in the ratio of, you know, the staging tests and production tests, but not all of your end-to-end tests will be in production, and that's fine. So let's talk about shifting your company's testing culture. This is my favorite thing to talk about because I get to like prove people wrong all the time. So what I would do if this is something that I wanted to propose to my company or to my team, I would explain why the pros outweigh the cons. So think of like, is your staging environment unreliable? Which I know that it is because, you know, it's staging. And then think of like, are there frequently issues that could have been caught if you were testing in production? Like, yes, there are. And then use examples from the past. Like, do you remember when we merged this thing and it caused this huge issue in production? Like, would we have been able to catch it if we tested in production with feature flags? And then propose a path forward. Like, you can't just go to management with a problem, you have to go to them with a solution. So think of things like, can I take some time in my next sprint to play with feature flagging? Like, I know Split has like a free version that you can try and just play with it and see if like it's something that your team would be interested in. And then with my company, like we used to be scared of deploying new features and we used to have debates of whether or not to deploy code on Fridays. Like now we don't fight about that. We fight about other things. And then once we started moving more and more things to testing in production, these discussions and this fear stopped because we already knew if something was broken and we fixed it ahead of time. That lead time to know if something was wrong was reduced. Okay, so there's always going to be those people who say testing in production will never work. And to those people, I say three things. Number one, staging will never fully represent production. It's a separate environment, it's separate data, it's never going to fully represent production. Number two, staging is a sunk cost. And number three, these people are not my target audience. They're either going to get on board or they're going to die off. Okay, so if this is something you wanted to do, let's just summarize the steps briefly. So you're going to want to install your tools. So your feature flagging, your automation framework, your job scheduler, and your alerting tool. And then you're going to want to create your test data and make sure that your test entities only interact with each other. And then you're going to want to write your tests and make sure that your teardown cleans up the test and you get alerted if any part of the test fails. So your setup, your test, or your teardown. Launch your feature behind a feature flag, deploy to your production canary, and have a drink because you're testing in production. Okay, in case you haven't been paying attention at all the past 35 minutes and you're just tuning in now, I want you to take away two things from this talk. The first thing is that no one cares if your feature is working in staging, we care if it works in production. And the second is that the only way to know if it's working in production is to test it in production. And that's it, guys. I can take questions now. Thank you for having me. And yeah.
for the questions, Talia said maybe it's better if you write them in the channel so everybody can see and she can read the question as well. So
Yes,
if you have any questions, please post them.
No questions? This is the first? Oh, here we go. Are there any integration testing with the features released after deployment in like an internal environment? No, only in production. So the integration tests will run in the build pipeline in production and they'll be blocking. So like if the integration test fails in production because of your feature, the rest of the code won't be promoted to production. You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, what would you say to developers saying that feature flags are too much work? It's an if-else statement, so I don't think an if-else statement is too much work. You just, like literally I showed it to you in the UI, you just create the feature flag in the UI, set your targeting rules, and write the if-else statement in your code. Yeah, I think it's manageable. But if you really do think it's too much work, like we have people who can help at Split. Like I'm happy to help you if it's really a problem. But it's really intuitive. It's just an if else. Like you're saying, if you're in the feature flag, you see the feature, and if you're not, then you don't. You guys also have a staging environment. Having extra efforts testing a product, is it way too time consuming? So we don't have a staging environment because all of our tests are running in production, and we don't, as far as I know, we don't use we don't abide by SOX compliance because our company doesn't. I don't think that we are in like that SOX world. But if you do, and if your company does need to have a staging environment because of like SOX and GDPR and whatever, data rules, then you can have that, and it's in production. And if it runs in staging, you don't want it to run in production. It's like a different set of tests because they're testing different things. You don't want the same test running in both places because if it runs in production, who cares if it runs in staging? Does that make sense? When do you start testing? As soon as I get requirements from product and I write my feature, I'm writing the test at the same time. So when the feature is done, then the test is done at the same time, and then I run the test that tests the feature. And then if there's any issues, I'll fix the issues, and then I'll turn the feature flag on. So the testing starts as soon as I know what the feature is and what's going on. Like sometimes I'll leave in blanks if I don't know like the selector name or whatever, if I'm waiting for issues from the developers, but you got to start like right away. When doing Canaries, how is the subset of users chosen? It's random. It's random. You allocate a specific percentage. Within Split, there's a bunch of different rules. Like I know I covered just allocating traffic, and I covered what else did I cover? Like certain targeting rules. There's also like white lists and black lists, and like you can get like super specific of like who you want to see specific features, but then after that it's random. So there's basically like a hierarchy, and you can say like these users are whitelisted to always see it, and then if you're in this location you can see it, and then if you're in this, if you have this device you can see it, and then after that everyone else, it's like a random allocation. It's really like customizable, so you can decide, but for the most part it's random. Have you used Test Cafe? I have not used Test Cafe for UI automation tests. I've heard of Test Cafe, but I have not personally used it. I'll give you guys a little more time. And if you guys have questions, you can always email me. If you set up Split and you're having issues, like I'm happy to help you with feature flagging and testing in production and all that. You can email me, you can tweet me, you can whatever. Okay. Oh, cool. You said that you flag the backend somehow that you're a test user. Do you know the technical details here? Yeah, so basically when you're creating a test user, in our specific case, we have a box, like a checkbox that just says like, this is a test user, and that sets that Boolean to be true. So the technical details are just setting like this Boolean to be true when that checkbox is on, and then you can differentiate that in like your data. Does that make sense? It's just a Boolean. Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure. Sorry again about all the sirens. It's a little crazy here in LA, but thank you for having me. And yeah, I'll be here for questions and other things, like email me, tweet me, whatever you guys want.
Thank you very much for your time. If you can just post the video that you mentioned, I wasn't paying attention when I wrote properly and didn't wrote properly. You mentioned the video that goes more in depth at a certain subject.
Yeah, on feature flag maintenance. So like when you have a lot of feature flags and you like implement this process, I'm gonna post it right now.
Yeah, we have a lot of feature flags, and actually my PM asked the question with the flags.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of issues, and that's why she asked, and we were complaining about the feature flags. I'm one of those.
Yeah, I made this like a while ago. It goes through like the basics of like what you need to know about setting up your feature flags and like best practices, and yeah. Cool. Well, if there's no more questions, I will let you guys go.
Okay. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day. It's just the beginning for you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.